Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome back to Business Innovators Radio. I'm your host, Frank Felker. Regular listeners of the show know that I usually interview guests who have insights or resources to help you run a successful business. It's generally targeted at people who are already business owners. But what if you're not yet a business owner, but you're feeling the urge to get into business? You're feeling that sense that you really need to leave the 9-to-5 world and strike out on your own. But you need help trying to figure out what sort of business you should start. Well, my guest today, Faizun Kamal of FranNet, is an expert at helping first-time entrepreneurs decide whether purchasing a franchise is the correct course of action for them to follow. In spite of the billions of dollars in revenue that franchises generate around the world every year, I've not always been the biggest fan of the model from the entrepreneur's perspective. But after speaking with Faizun and hearing what she had to share, and also finding out more about the process that her company uses to guide people through even deciding whether or not being a business owner is the right way for them to go, I felt it was important to share what she has to say with you today. So, Faizun Kamal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. It's wonderful to be here.
I'm really glad that you're here, Faizun. You're a very smart lady, and you have an interesting perspective on life in general, but specifically on business ownership. And I think your insight is going to be really beneficial for a lot of people. We've got a lot of territory to cover, but let's start with this. Who is it that you serve at FranNet, and how is it that you help them?
Fantastic. So yes, I'm a franchise specialist with FranNet. And essentially, Frank, what that means is I work with individuals who have some sort of pain in their life. Here's what I mean. I work with individuals who have the specific pain of some sort of a life or career transition. They have either gotten laid off, they are getting ready to retire, but don't feel ready to retire. They may be getting divorced, or they may simply be in a job that they have been for 20, 30 plus years and have never had that sense of fulfillment. And I've always wondered, what else is out there for me that I could be doing, but that I don't know how to do, or that I don't even know whether it exists. Those are the folks that I typically work with. And I do only one thing, and it's quite simple really. I help them find a business that is a perfect fit for them.
I've heard you say a couple of times, find a business that they could be a rock star in. What do you mean by that?
I'm glad you asked. This is probably, Frank, the heart and soul of the work that I do. So let me answer you this way. Being the entrepreneurial guru that I know you are, I am sure you laugh, but you know it's true. You read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
In it, Kiyosaki talks about the fact that having a great business system, it's an essential key to success. And it is. But what we have found being in this industry for over 30 years is, in addition to having a great business system, it is absolutely essential to have what we call the fit. So we identify a great business system, and then we identify whether that business system is a particular fit for who you, Frank Felker, are as a business owner, potentially. Here's what I mean by that. Every business system has successful operators and less than successful operators. And the difference is the individual. And the key piece, one of the key pieces of what I do at FranNet is, once I have a client who walks through the doors and expresses an interest in working with me, I start to put together what I call their business model, their personalized business model of what their skills and their strengths are. And then we start, and that kicks off the process of starting to look at what might be the best fit franchise for them.
So you're saying that based on a person's personality, their background, what they enjoy doing, one business might be perfect for them, or at least better for them than another business. Can you give me an example of what you mean, a personality type that would not be well suited to a particular business, or vice versa?
Absolutely. So I'll give you this example. It's a little simplistic, but I think it absolutely will answer the question you're asking me. So let's imagine there are two businesses, business A and B. Business A requires the business owner, in order for them to be successful at building and growing the business, they need to do on average 30 cold calls a day. That is what the business model is predicated upon. Okay? You need to be able to be really good at making cold calls, because that is really the way in which you're going to grow your customer base and hence your business. That's business A. Business B, on the other hand, it requires the business owner to have that sort of personality and skill set that lends themselves to doing wonderfully well in interpersonal settings. They're really rock stars at networking events. They thrive on it. They enjoy it. They are able to create connections and rapport with people, complete strangers that they meet at different events. And business B requires that particular skill set and that particular method for the business owner to generate customers and hence grow the business. So let's pretend you're my client, and we did a skills assessment for you, Frank Felker. And from that assessment, we find that you just have that kind of personality where you've told me and you've answered through the series of questions we have in the assessment that these are the kinds of events that you really enjoy. You love networking. You love being able to walk into a room full of strangers and connect with a number of people and understand what their needs are, understand what are some of the challenges that they may be facing in whatever they're doing. You're really good at doing that. On the other hand, we have also found out that the mere thought of cold calling makes your palms sweaty and your heart starts to beat a little faster. You know where I'm going with this, right?
Sure.
So when we know that information, business A that requires the cold calling, it's clearly a horrible fit for you. And if I placed you in that and you started that business, the probability that you would be what we call a top performer in the system or a rock star in the system is very, very low. Conversely, business B is probably the one where you're going to shine at because it's inherently within your skill set. It's something that comes naturally to you and you're very good at doing it. Does that help?
I really like that because I think so many of the people that I've spoken to who are baby boomers like myself, but unlike myself, have spent their entire adult lives and careers working 9-to-5 jobs and are now considering exactly what you spoke of. It's time for a life change. Their nest is empty. They're retiring from their job. They probably have most of their house paid for and no more big expenditures on the horizon for college or furniture or moving or what have you. And they're looking for something to do in their retirement years to stay busy and make a few shekels. But I don't think they look at it the way you are looking at it, and they should be. They're just like, well, whatever I can find that's, I can afford to get into and sounds like it would be fun and what have you. They don't really think about making a match. And so this leads me, that's sort of half answers my next question, but I want to ask it to you anyway. The question is, and let me just finish how I want to pose it. The question is, why should somebody who's considering buying a business choose to work with you rather than doing this type of research on their own? Now, we've just pointed up a great reason because you have a much better perspective on it than they do. And you've been doing this over and over and worked with a lot of different clients. And FranNet's been doing it for, didn't you say 30 years?
Yes, actually, 2017 marks the 30th year anniversary for the company.
So in addition to what we've already talked about, how is it that someone would be better served by working with someone from FranNet, let's say, or someone who is an expert such as yourself, rather than trying to do it on their own? Sure.
This is actually one of the most common questions I get, Frank. This is how I'll answer you. Typically I find a lot of people who have opened the business from scratch, right? So they've done the research and they've decided to open a business. Actually, it could be a business from scratch or it could be a franchise business. Typically, this is what their research process looks like. They will speak with their friends, right? Their trusted friends. They might have a friend who runs a very successful cafe. but there is no reason for them to think that they would be equally as successful at running a cafe. They might be speaking with their brother-in-law's best friend, who happens to be a lawyer, and says, "What? You're thinking about doing what? Do you know?" And then they go off, right? Now, the point I'm trying to make is, take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Every person who offers up their solicited and unsolicited opinions, they're coming at it from their experiences, obviously, their life experiences, their background. So take everything with a grain of salt. Franchising, by its very nature, is not something that you wake up in the morning one day and say, "I'm an expert at this." It's an industry that is complicated. It is nuanced. As with, I'll give you the example of something like buying a house, right? We've all done it at least once in our life, if not more. And for those of us who have bought a house with the help of an agent, know how useful that experience can be. The other piece to this that I would say to you, Frank, is my services to the client are completely free. And so I say, if my expertise and my services are free to you, why would you not take advantage of me, particularly if it involves the likelihood of you making a very costly mistake goes all the way down, or we can take the risk out of the process as much as possible, because there's a very rational search process that we have in place. Right?
Well, let's go right into that.
Sure.
Talk about your process all the way through, from the moment somebody comes. Don't you have some sort of an evaluation test that you put them through, and then what happens after that?
Fantastic. All right. So if you want to think of it this way, Frank, the FranNet process, you could think of it as a 5-step process: profile, model, match, research, and purchase. So I'll go through quite briefly through each part, and then you can ask me if you have any more questions.
Sure.
But essentially, the first step is the profile, right? So I want to be sure that I understand you, your goals, your dreams, your financial needs. And so the first step is to talk together. At that point, I will ask the client to fill out what we call the Personal Franchise Assessment, or the PFA. This is an online assessment. It takes about anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to fill out online. As soon as you hit submit, it comes right to me. This is the profiling section, okay? This then brings us into the second step, which is the model. Once I receive the answers to your profile, to your assessment, I take that and I start to develop your personalized business model. Essentially, this is the model of the business that's going to be perfect for you. The model is uniquely the client's, because this is really the key piece of document the client is going to be using to compare each business that I give them to look at against their business model.
May I interrupt you? I want to make sure I understand,
Please.
because I think this is fascinating. So you're saying the business model that you create for them based on their profile and assessment is not a real business, but this is what your perfect business would look like if we were to find it.
That is exactly right.
I love that.
Let me thank you. This is actually one of the key steps of the process that we use, Frank. And I will tell you, on average, I spend anywhere from 3 to 6 hours developing the business model and then perfecting the business model with the client. Let me get a little bit deeper into this. So a business model, picture it as a blank canvas or a blank piece of paper in which I start to ask you questions such as, so Frank, when you think about a business, are you thinking more of a business that is home-based, or are you thinking it could have a retail location? And you give me an answer, and I write it down. Frank, as you think about a business, do you envision having employees? You do. How many? What sort of employees? Are these salaried, hourly? What sort of skill set do these employees
I'm curious,
have?
how often when you ask these questions, does the response come back, blank stare and dial tone? Oh, I never really thought about that.
You would actually be quite surprised.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
You would be surprised. I might not get the answer on first blush. I will ask the same question in 3 or 4 different ways, and the answer comes out.
Great.
It's a very odd thing that happens. And here's the thing. You don't necessarily have to have the answers to all the questions right away, because at this point, we're building the model. And the model will become complete as we move forward in the process, as you start to get more information, right? So it's a blueprint, if you will, for what your ideal business looks like. Answer your question?
That's wonderful, yes.
Okay.
So what's the next step?
So the first step then becomes matching. So we've profiled, we've modeled, and now we're going to match. So at this point, once we have most of your model down on paper, I will be ready to suggest certain businesses that structurally and strategically meet your business model. Okay? These are, so let me take a step back here and just say, FranNet has pre-screened all the represented companies that I will recommend to a client. And FranNet has built relationships with only the best franchisors so that I can select the best opportunity for my clients from them. More importantly, most of the candidates that come to me don't know the choices that exist in franchising, and they tend to make decisions without sufficient knowledge of that, right? So one of the key pieces, just to go back to the prior question you had, what are the advantages of working with someone like me? I have a better understanding of the different choices of businesses out there that a typical client might not even know exists, right?
Sure.
So we do the matching. All right, so that's the third step. At this point, I typically give my clients 3 different franchises to start the research process with. And again, these are 3 businesses that are based on the modeling that we have now done. All right. The fourth step of the process is the research. And Frank, I'll tell you that this may be the most important step of all. I can't do the research for you. Your wife or your husband can do the research for you. It is your job as a client to do the heavy lifting and to conduct a complete and thorough investigation, if you will, of any business that you think may be the right one for you. My job in this stage of the process is to act as a coach. I give advice, I give information, I have...
Well, what sort of research are you talking about?
What sort of research? Essentially, this is so... let's go back. I said I give my clients 3 businesses to start the research process with. So the first call is usually with the franchisor, right, with the corporate headquarters.
Your client would call them.
The franchisor. So after I do the business modeling and I give the first set of 3 businesses for them to look at, that concludes that first meeting that I have with the client. Okay. At the end of that meeting, I then put in touch the client with the 3 franchisors. I give the 3 franchisors some information on who this particular client is and what their financial and their personal needs are, based on which I have made the determination that this particular franchise is the right fit for them. The first step in the research process is when the franchisor calls the client to say, hi, Faizun Kamal of FranNet shared your information with me. I understand you're interested in us because of A, B, and C. Right? So there's that first call. At that call, during that call, typically the franchisor will give a list of franchisees, existing franchisees within their business, that they will give to my client to say, we are absolutely delighted you're looking at us potentially. We would like you to start the conversation with this list of franchisees that we have. These are typically existing franchisees within the business. And this is the heart of the process, meaning this is when I encourage my clients to ask the really hard and tough questions of what it is like running that particular business. Because remember, once they make the decision to buy that franchise, they become them in effect. And so before you take that step, find out, what does a day-to-day look like for you? Typically, what are some of the challenges you faced in growing your business? When you have faced A, B, and C challenge, how have you been able to resolve it? How helpful has the franchisor been in the support that they have given to you, right? So this is the time when you ask these really hard questions and try and understand, because at the end of the day, the reason you're asking all these questions is to ask yourself, do I picture myself doing what they're doing? Number one. Number two, if I do I look like one of those top performers, or am I going to look like those people who may be struggling?
I really like that, because that you're absolutely right, both in franchises and independent businesses as well. There are top performers, bottom performers, and people in between. And I really, really like your focus on keeping that perspective in mind, that you want to, if you're going to do this is a huge life decision. You want to make sure you're going to knock it out of the park, or at least minimize the opportunity to not be a top producer. I need to, for us to continue to move along, because we're running a little short on time. So they, in addition to calling other franchisees, are there any other research steps that they take?
Yes. So typically the franchisor is also going to give the client what is known in the industry as an FDD. That stands for Franchise Disclosure Document. Frank, think of the FDD as essentially a stock prospectus. It's essentially a legal document that the franchise, is required to file with the Federal Trade Commission. By the way, franchising is a regulated industry. What that means,
very highly regulated.
Very highly regulated. And that means that they're protected. The FDD is a legal document that I ask my clients to review very carefully. It basically gives any and all information related to whether the franchisor has any sort of litigation pending against them. If they have any earnings claims, it should be disclosed in the FDD. But most importantly, from the perspective of a potential franchisee, the biggest piece that the FDD has is that comprehensive list of franchisees. So this is every individual who has ever bought into that system, past and present. This is a huge resource, as you might imagine, for obvious reasons. I would say researching the FDD, understanding what that industry is about, understanding what are some of the drivers that's perhaps moving the industry forward, potentially what are some challenges that the industry might be facing. These are some other pieces of research that I typically ask my clients to do. And again, all through the way I provide guidance on how they can do that.
And then what is the final step, or have we gotten to the final step yet?
So the final step after that is the purchase, right? So they've gone, so they've now moved through the process. They have looked at 3, perhaps more businesses. And as they move through the process of talking to the franchisor and the franchisees, typically one will rise to the top. At this point in the process, I always advise my clients, if they can, to do what's called a discovery day with the franchisor. A discovery day, Frank, is essentially when the franchisor invites you to their corporate headquarters. And I tell my clients, look, you are telling me you're very serious, and this looks like the business that is going to be the one for you. Before you pull the trigger on it, go visit them and look eyeball to eyeball with the people you're going to be working with for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, possibly years of your life.
You're going to be in a very close relationship with these people.
Very much so. Very much so. So you know me. I prefer the eyeball to eyeball approach. I want to know what you're like. What kind of a person are you like to work with? Because I know I'm going to be leaning on you quite heavily, at least in the first couple of years. So I asked them to do that. And, keep in mind, the franchises that we have at FranNet, the good, robust franchises know that you never sell a franchise to anyone. You always recruit them. You always recruit people into your franchise. It's very much like any other job, Frank. The employer, in this case, the franchisor, they're equally as vested in making sure that the franchisee coming in is a good fit for them. And so the discovery day is also an opportunity for the franchisor to say, would Frank be a top performer if he joined our system? So they are, if you will, they're interviewing the client just as much the client is still interviewing them. If everything checks out and both parties are happy with each other, the client gets an agreement. At this point in the process, I again say to my client, time out. Before you sign anything, I need you to have the document be reviewed by a franchise attorney. A franchise attorney is someone who specializes in looking at FDDs, in looking at franchise documents. And I don't have that capability. I do know people who are franchise attorneys, and I can refer my clients to them, and I do. Again, once they have gone through that process and everything else checks out, then they're ready to sign on the dotted line and the deal is done. And that's the last step of the process.
Well, that's an excellent, structured, thorough process. The question that comes to my mind is that when they sign on the dotted line and make their initial payment to the franchisor, is that the first point at which one of your clients has had to stroke a check for anything?
Yes.
That's amazing. I just have to interject with a quick story because I won't give the whole story. I'll just say that I knew a couple who decided to buy a franchise. They made a huge mistake. They did it entirely on their own, and the only reason they bought this franchise was because it was a great burger shop that they had enjoyed when they were in college. And now it's 25 years later, and they made the mistake of becoming the first franchisees of this chain of burger shops that decided to expand by franchise, but didn't know anything about franchising. And long story short, I'm sure they lost somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million before they went out of business in 6 or 7 months. And virtually every mistake that they made could have been avoided if they had worked with someone like you, like right out of the gate. You don't want to be the first franchisee. I don't think that's going to pass muster with the FranNet directory of franchisors. But we really are plowing through our allotted time here. So I want to get to a last couple of things. The process that you've laid out is very well thought out. It's very well structured and clearly very beneficial and at no cost until somebody signs on the dotted line. Still in all, every business owner like yourself, like myself, occasionally runs into somebody for whom we know we could really serve them well, and yet they choose to excuse themselves from the opportunity for some reason, one or another. When that happens to you, what is generally the reason that somebody says, that sounds great, but I'm going to have to say no?
Yeah. Excellent question, Frank. I will tell you, if you want a one-sentence answer, I usually find any and all objection is really rooted in some sort of fear. That's the bottom line.
Okay.
And these fears, these fears can be as varied as the individual, but typically I find a couple reasons to be the top reasons why somebody would say, this all sounds good, but I think I want to do it on my own. I want to go the independent route. One, a lot of people think they simply don't have the money that's required to invest in a franchise. When I get that, if they will actually come out and say that, I will say to them, that might be true, that might not be true. But I don't know that until you have filled out the assessment. Once you have, and there's a portion of
Sure.
that's natural, it'll give me a better sense, and I can then tell you, you know what, you're absolutely right, Frank. I don't think a franchise is the right option for you at this point in time. Maybe down the road, but I don't know that yet. That's one. Two, another one that I get quite a lot is, I just don't think I can follow a playbook. And really my answer to that is, if you really believe that, and you are someone who does not like to follow somebody else's rules, then a franchise is probably not the best option for you.
And you see, that's me. That's exactly me.
It.
And that's why I have not always been a fan of the model, because I have always wanted to do things my own way, and it hasn't always been the best way to go, I'll tell you. But nonetheless, I would have felt uncomfortable within a very highly structured environment like that. And I've also met people who did get into franchises who felt similarly. And after they'd been in for a period of time, they did feel constrained by the model. But oftentimes I've also seen that the franchisor, they can't have too much latitude with any given franchisee because they have to have an even-handed approach across their network. But if that person has shown their mettle, they will get a little bit of latitude and to be able to do their own thing. Right. And I think a great example is the guy who invented the Big Mac sandwich. Ray Kroc did not want anybody creating their own dang sandwiches. This is McDonald's, We make hamburgers and cheeseburgers here, pal. But the guy created the Big Mac, and it was a big seller. And Ray came out to see it, and he said, I like this. We're gonna roll this one out. So that's really, for anybody who's listening and thinking, well, why would you be against the idea? That's really the thing for me, that I'm the kind of person kind of writes my own playbook. and I'm more interested in, not more interested, but very interested in expressing myself creatively through my business.
And again, Frank, it's one of those things where I really do think it's a case of know thyself. And if you really do know that about yourself, that's fantastic. And then franchising is not the way to go for you. For a lot of other people, I say, okay, well, I see that you're saying that, but I want you to consider something. If you were given a playbook where you were told, if you follow the playbook, the chances that you are going to be successful doing A, B, and C goes up drastically. Where you are making the money that you have laid out for me, these are your financial goals, where the likelihood of you reaching those goals are that much more tenable. Would that help you change your mind, or would you still say that you don't want to follow the rules? Right. So it's one of those things where at the end of the day, I say that, in fact, the franchising seminars that I do for the various small business development centers in this area, I do franchising seminars for their clients, and I almost always open by saying franchising is not for everyone, and it really isn't. But if it is, let's figure it out. If it's not, let's also figure that out. So
that's the whole thing that really just struck a chord with me, Faizun, is that what a wonderful approach that you take, which is let's find out. If it is, great. If it's not, great. No harm, no foul. I can still help you, my friend. I can help you make clear or make sense out of what I call the entrepreneurial urge.
That's
and
right.
That so many people have. How did you originally get involved with FranNet, Faizun?
That's funny you asked that, because I was just going to say to you, having started a business about 7-8 years ago that was not a franchise, and having run it for a number of years, contrasting that with the experience now of being in a franchise, I can tell you that for me, in the core of my heart, I always felt I was a little bit of a rebel. I was a badass.
I can see that.
But here's the thing. I also knew enough about myself to know that there were certain things that in running a business that were required that I frankly did not like to do. And these are typically what are known as the back end functions. And with a franchise, one of the things for me personally that I find so beautiful is with a franchise, the good, solid, robust ones, the back-end operations. So these would be, updating your website or billing a client or what have you, right? The back-end operations. These are typically taken care of by the franchisor. What you, as a business owner, as a franchisee, are required to do are those things that move the business forward, that grow the business. So those are the skill sets that I knew I had, that I enjoyed spending my time on. And that's what I get to do now. So you asked me my story. I came to franchising the way many, many, many people that I now work with come to franchising, which is I got laid off. I was in the corporate world for many years, and I got laid off, and I started to think about, again, as with a lot of people, what did the next chapter of my life hold for me? And I'll tell you one of the things that I didn't like with my previous life. I was working 80-hour weeks. I had just had a baby who had just turned 1. I barely saw her because I dropped her off before the crack of dawn and picked her up after 7 o'clock at night. I barely saw my husband. The life-work balance was completely non-existent. And so when this happened, the layoff for me was a blessing. It was not even a blessing in disguise, Frank. It was just a straight-up blessing. I said to myself, how do I make the most of this opportunity that has been handed to me? And, one thing led to another, and I found FranNet. And now the way I lead my life and the way I run my business, the flexibility it allows me between my personal life and my professional life, the fact that I get to bring my core skill set, my strength to my work every day with my clients, it's a joy. It is an absolute joy.
Well, that's wonderful.
I know how entrepreneurship and owning my own business has transformed my life. And I guess you could say that's my why in what I do.
That's great. What a great story. Well, certainly your passion comes through as you speak about what you do and how you help people. So if somebody listening is intrigued and thinking that your process could be helpful for them, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Let's see. I think there's only one of me on LinkedIn and Facebook. If they type in Faizun Kamal, I should pop up. They can connect with me on social media. They can connect with me by email or by phone. I'm available.
Well, I would really recommend, honestly, that if you just give us one quick way, like a telephone number,
sure.
And then if they were to call you, what happens then? I mean, people are always concerned about, they don't want to get roped into a sales call. I don't want to, get into an endless loop. So if someone were to call you, first off, if you could give us your phone number.
Yes, 443-604-6276. That's my cell.
I'm sorry. 443-604
6276.
6276. So if I call Faizun and I say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, can you help me? What happens then?
That first call, it's probably going to be about 10-15 minutes long, and it's really a pre-qualification call, Frank. And so on my end, I will ask you a couple of questions. Frank, thanks so much for getting in touch with me. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do? And why are you thinking about franchising at this point in your life? That really gives me a good sense of where the person's North Star is, if you know what I mean. Why are they looking at franchising now? Not 5 years ago, not 5 years from now, today. At the end of that call, I will generally get a good sense of whether they might or might not be a good candidate. If I think the person has the potential to be a franchisee, I will then send them their personalized link to the PFA, the assessment, and ask them to fill that out. Because absent that, I don't really have any information that I'm working with. That would be the first.
Great. And then from that point, you guys can make both of you can make an initial assessment of whether or not it makes sense to have any further communication.
That's right.
Well, Faizun, thank you so much for appearing with me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.